John P. Cashen worked on the canals his entire life, following in the footsteps of Patrick Cashen, his Ireland-born father. John drove mules, was a steersman, and a canal boat captain. In his retired years, he used his experience to build canal boat models of various types that would have transported lime, lumber, black marble, and later paper on the Glens Falls feeder and Champlain canals. In a manuscript written by Cashen later in life, he recalled his work as a driver of the horses or mules that towed the canal boats. He takes us along the route from Whitehall to Waterford, noting, "When I had horses towing on the canal, I think that I slept in nearly every barn along the Champlain Canal."
The Champlain Canal started up at Whitehall, and it was about 60 miles to Waterford. The Lake Champlain Transportation Company had a lot of boats, also had a lot of towing lines on the canal. They had 3 horses, possibly mules, and what was called a string team, one ahead of the other. They had a few teams of small mules that had 4 in a string, and the distance between one station and the next was about 12 miles.
A lot of hay from Canada and Lake Champlain was boated on the canal, and in the fall of the year, a lot of potatoes were also shipped by boat along the canal.
So, after you left Whitehall, the next station was Fort Anne. Then came Fort Edward, and Schuylerville, Stillwater, and finally, Waterford. At each end of the canal, a team was allowed about 6 hours of rest before they could be sent out again. At other stations, they were only allowed 4 hours of rest. Alright, now first level, now that's the distance between locks, that's what we called it, was about 5 miles from Whitehall to just north of Comstock, where I think it was called Mud Lock. Next, the 7 Mile Creek had a guard lock just south of Comstock. The only time they used it was if you had a high water in the creek. The other times, the gates were all open and you went right through. So, after the 7 Mile Creek came Fort Anne. Had about 3 locks there, as I recall, a single lock and 2 combined as you sort of looked up from the creek down to the next level. It was called a summit level there because you looked down on each end, Fort Anne and Fort Edward. The man who had a store and a barn on the upper lock was a big man who had lost one arm. I think he was a war veteran. As I recall, his name was William Vaughn. 2 places where there were stores and barns was Smith's Basin and Dunham's Basin. At Fort Edward, the last I remember was Dave Williams. He also ran something I can't remember, but he ran a store until it burned.
At Smith's Basin, they boated lime from the Keenan Lime Company kilns. The kilns are now torn down across the barge canal. The last boat to run from there was the Arthur McMullen of Glens Falls. International Paper Company at Fort Edward had a canal from the Champlain up to their mill. Pulpwood came from Canada by boat. The company also boated wallpaper to New Jersey and sulfur from New York City to the mill.
The next level from Fort Edward was about 5 miles to the Moses Kill. Jim Kennedy had a store and a barn about a quarter mile south of the Moses Kill's lock. On 3 Mile level was a big country store and a barn owned by Will Patterson. Next on the other end of the 3 Mile level was Fort Miller store and a barn run by Billy Harris. So the next level is about 1 mile to Base's Lock store and barn run by Ralph Batten. Then you got 2 miles next level to River Lock called North River. Now you cross the Hudson River to Northumberland. Jesse Billings' house was just across the road from the towpath, and his house is still there. The lock at Northumberland lets you out of the river to the canal.
Jesse Billings had 2 big ice houses on the river south of Fort Miller and boated ice to New York City.
Alright, next level was 16 miles to Stillwater. On the 16-mile level, you had stores and barns at Schuylerville. Mike Howe ran them. Next, at Coveville, Frank McDonald ran one place. About 1 mile south, Larry Costello had a store and a barn. And the next place was run by Mr. Patterson. It was a big country store and a barn, same as his son at Moses Kill. Next, a Mr. Randall. And he had a store and a barn at Bemis Heights. Next, at the north end of Stillwater, Jerry Sullivan's store and barn. Then, all along 1 mile south, Jim Nolan had a store and a barn. About 1 mile south of that was Backer's Lock, and Bill Weed had a store and barn. The next level was 4 miles, and it went through Mechanicville. At the south end of town, I think it was Kelsey had a store and a barn. Then, next Hewitt Lock, Wilkins had a store and barn.
At Mechanicville, they shipped brick and molding sand by boat. They also sent pulpwood from Canada by boat to the mill there and sulfur from New York City to the mill.
Next level was 1 mile to Flynn's Lock, a man by the name of Smith. He has a store and barn there. Next level was about 3 3/4 miles to the 2 locks. They were about half mile apart. On the upper lock, Alpha Bell had a store and a barn, and about 2 miles south, you hit Waterford.
The drivers of the towing company that had a lot of teams would get around $14 a month plus meals. Room was free in the barns at the stations along the route. The day would start about 4 a.m., and by 6:30 you would eat breakfast and feed the horses from baskets you hung on their heads with straps. Going with the current, you did not stop the horses or mules, and they would eat as you went along. At noontime, you would find a shady place and stop for a while, and if it was warm, sometimes take a couple of hours rest.